Immanuel Kant, born in 1724 in Königsberg, Germany, which is modern-day Kaliningrad, Russia. He established his position as one of the most revered figures in the history of philosophy during the Enlightenment. Through his main works, the Critique of Pure Reason, the groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, the Critique of Practical Reason, and the Critique of Judgment. The foundations of Kant's entire philosophical system are laid out in the preface to the Critique of Pure Reason. The preface, you say? But who actually reads the preface? Well, let this be a lesson for you, because from this preface we understand that his project is centred on three key objectives. First, establishing the limits of rational inquiry. Second, using these limits to redefine metaphysics as a legitimate science. Third, resolving the conflict between dogmatic rationalism and sceptical empiricism. For Kant, philosophy faced a crisis beyond no one having any friends. This crisis was its inability to reconcile metaphysics with the limits of human knowledge. On one side were the dogmatic rationalists, who speculated about metaphysical realities without first grounding their claims in epistemology. Although Descartes had placed epistemology as the cornerstone of philosophical inquiry, his flight from experience had led to highly speculative conclusions regarding the nature of the self, the soul, and God. On the other side, skeptics, especially empiricists like David Hume, had rejected metaphysical speculation and attempted to base all knowledge on experience. Hume, in fact, is credited by Kant with waking him from his philosophical slumber by questioning the rational basis of concepts such as causality, infinity, and necessity. You can find more about this from my video on Hume's theory of ideas. And although resolving this conflict would probably harm a philosopher's quest to make friends, Kant persevered. And after gathering all the humility he could, his proposal was to conduct a Copernican revolution in philosophy. Just as Nicholas Copernicus had revolutionized astronomy by shifting the focus from the Earth to the Sun as the centre of the solar system, Kant proposed that philosophy must reject the notion that knowledge passively conforms to the external world and recognise that the mind actively structures experience. So rather than discovering reality as it is in itself, we grasp it only through the epistemological framework imposed by our own cognitive faculties. And it seems that there is good reason for suggesting that the mind is not a passive agent in receiving sensory data. We know that not all minds are equal in how data is processed. Thomas Nagel's What Is It Like to Be a Bat does an excellent job of highlighting how subjective experience differs between bats and humans, for example. Although I was unable to establish if he formulated these ideas while sitting on the edge of his bed, as this image suggests. The details of this cognitive framework are important. In particular, the distinction between knowledge that is gained from experience, named a posteriori, and knowledge gained independent of experience, named a priori. A priori knowledge is exemplified by mathematical concepts that we can understand independently of our experience, like 2 plus 2 equals 4. Examples of knowledge gained a posteriori are found in any truth discovered via observation, like the sky is blue. Kant reasons that for the a posteriori knowledge to make sense at all, it must be grounded in a priori faculties of the mind that categorise those experiences. Otherwise, we would be receiving raw, unsorted data. It would be like clicking on your favourite movie website and just finding reams of unsorted movie titles, cast lists, and reviews. Since we do not passively receive knowledge from the world, our cognitive faculties must actively structure it. Kant identifies two key faculties that make this possible: sensibility and understanding. Sensibility is the faculty that intuitively receives the raw data of the natural world and orders it according to the a priori forms of space and time. The understanding then applies the a priori categories, which allow us to organise and interpret our experience in an intelligible way. It is not until his introduction to the Critique, yes, you also need to read the introduction, that Kant grounds all of this in his vital distinction between analytic and synthetic judgments. Analytic judgments are those where the predicate is contained in the subject, meaning that the truth of the judgment requires no new information. For example, the judgment that all bachelors are unmarried can be assessed simply by analysing the meaning of the term bachelor. Therefore, Kant believes that all analytic judgments are known a priori. Synthetic judgments, however, are those which the predicate is not contained in the subject. This is most evident when empirical investigation is required to establish the veracity of a synthetic judgment. These are synthetic a posteriori judgments. However, the key move for Kant is when he also uses the synthetic category to identify necessary truths such as mathematical judgments. For example, the judgment that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line requires an appeal to pure intuition and reason, making it a synthetic a priori truth. I say defining the synthetic a priori is a key move because this allows Kant to propose that mathematical and scientific principles need not be derived solely from experience as empiricists like Hume had insisted. Causality, for instance, becomes part of the a priori structure of human cognition, rather than a principle formed by habit via experience. Mathematics is derived from the cognitive faculties of space and time. However, Kant's framework ensures that our metaphysical inquiry is hooked into experience. We have no access to a metaphysical reality independent of experience, since knowledge is always shaped by the mind's structural framework. Kant expresses this idea by differentiating between knowledge of phenomena, the way reality appears to us through experience, and Noumena, things as they are in themselves which remain beyond our cognitive grasp. This approach to place limits on metaphysics whilst preserving the objectivity of scientific inquiry through the structuring of the mind's a priori faculties is what Kant came to term transcendental idealism. In 1970, Saul Kripke, seen here sporting the hat that has been rumoured to give him his special philosophical powers, introduced a major complication for Kant in his lectures on naming and necessity, by identifying necessary a posteriori truths and contingent a priori truths. For example, water is H2O is known to us by experience, making it a posteriori, but is necessarily true. Anything not H2O cannot be water. Furthermore, if a ruler were to say, "I name this object Schmidt," they would be assigning a name by stipulation, which would be a priori, meaning I can't derive this from experience, but the name itself would be contingent. They could have called the object Jones, for example. Kant's framework does not account for such categories, for he had held that all a priori truths are necessary and all a posteriori truths are contingent. Whether Kant's transcendental idealism can accommodate these categories is still a matter of debate, but this challenge has clear implications for his understanding of necessity, causality, and the limits of human cognition.